Multi-time champion Gokhan Saki has one of the most entertaining styles ever seen in kickboxing. Much like Dekkers, Saki's interpretation of the Dutch style of kickboxing shares a lot of similarities with the peekaboo style of boxing used by the likes of Mike Tyson and Floyd Patterson. In similar fashion, Gokhan uses lateral footwork and head movement to land fight-ending counters, set up one-off power shots, and completely deconstruct opponents' guards. On top of this, Saki has one of the biggest hearts in the sport, aggressively challenging contenders far bigger than him. So let's take a look at how Gokhan sets up his legendary Saki bombs. Saki is a big fan of what's sometimes called the catch and throw. He'll take a punch on his guard in order to throw a harder strike back. There's obviously a big risk involved with this tactic, so Saki will usually duck and cover block at the same time. That way, one defensive movement reinforces the other, acting as a failsafe in case the other one isn't quite enough. Somewhat unusual for kickboxing, Saki also loves to weave under punches. While this normally isn't a great idea because you put your head in range for kicks and knees, Saki still manages to use this tactic to its fullest. He'll step as he weaves to create new angles and lines of attack, moving out of the opponent's line of sight to blindside them. Saki's able to get away with this because he's discerning about when he uses head movement, mitigating the risks by employing it only when an opponent is already too committed to his strike to quickly land a follow-up knee or kick. Weaving under a punch to return a punch is one thing, but part of what makes Saki such an elite fighter is that he could dodge multiple strikes as he's throwing multiple strikes himself. To do this, Saki must navigate his own punches around his opponents, crossing over or underneath them to reach his target. But when he gets it right, Saki can use his head movement to evade strikes while landing his own. Saki's best weapon is probably his lead hook, and he throws it in a distinctly different manner from most fighters, finishing the movement with a deep outside crouch to give the punch a more downward trajectory. At times, it almost looks as if he's throwing a lead overhand. Saki loves to set up his hook and most of his other power punches off of an inside slip. So much so that many times he uses it as a feint. Notice here how he could cut off the ring with head movement alone. Saki's inside slips are seen as such a danger because they threaten multiple kinds of power blows. What Saki is doing is pairing two or more power strikes that have opposite defenses off of the same preparatory movement. In other words, when Saki slips inside, he could be loading up a lead hook or moving into an overhand. Similarly, he could be loading up for a body hook or moving into a rear leg roundhouse kick. Since the moves he's threatening are defended in completely opposite ways, opponents defending against the wrong attack face dire consequences. The result is what you see here, an opponent mistaking Saki's slight inside crouch as the start of his roundhouse kick and trying to check it, but instead taking a hard lead hook to the side. But of course, it can be hard to take out high-level competition with just one strike, which is why Saki also excels at destroying an opponent's guard. And he does this with well-crafted combinations. The first and simplest way Saki gets through an opponent's guard is to mix up throwing high and low strikes to opposite sides. This is one of those tactics that shouldn't work in theory, but does work in practice. Striking an opponent high on one side shouldn't in any way open their defenses for a low strike on the other side. But even elite fighters can slip into raising or lowering both arms at the same time, especially when they get fatigued. Mixing punches and low kicks work for a much more technical reason. Taking Saki's punches on their guard often knocks opponents slightly off balance, forcing them to sink their weight onto their opposite leg. Saki can then target that leg. Saki also likes to double up on the same side. Hard to do with power, but a great way to open up shots by enticing opponents to adjust their guard. An opponent defending one shot makes way for Saki's next shot. Similarly, a punch down the inside can entice an opponent to tighten their guard, making way for strikes from the side. Or vice versa. Once again, a great thing about using this style in kickboxing is that you could add on kicks. And Saki does this as much as possible, cutting off opponents as they try to flee. One of Saki's coolest techniques is to frame off of an opponent's guard while shuffling into a ridiculously wide roundhouse kick. This kick is very reminiscent of Dekkers' kick, with Saki leaning his entire body and turning his hip completely over. Saki is truly a living legend. He's still fighting top competition to this day at Glory Kickboxing. Speaking of, big thanks to Glory for the quality footage. For the modern martial artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.